Hey everybody, it's Greg from Nexus Property Management. We're here at Nexus's headquarters in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and today I'm excited. We have with us Michael Leshinsky of Leshinsky Finance. Mike, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Mike is here today to tell us a little bit about his profession, and it's a role that really doesn't get much attention, in my opinion. Mike is a business consultant, and he helps individuals, he helps companies, organizations, entities of all sizes and types. So Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about your profession, your background, maybe your schooling, where you grew up, and just give the audience a little perspective.
Sure, I'd be happy to. All right, well, gosh, where I grew up?
Yeah.
So I actually grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and then I went to Wisconsin for undergrad. They have something called reciprocity, where you can pay in-state tuition between Minnesota and Wisconsin, and vice versa.
Interesting.
So people from Wisconsin can go to Minnesota, and then my dad's side is from New England. So after Wisconsin, I moved here in like 04 or 05 to the east side of Providence. And then I went on at Providence College for a master's in modern portfolio theory investment analysis. And then I actually continued on again at Boston University in post-grad work in real estate valuation, underwriting, and finance. And I haven't told many people, but I guess a lot of people will find out today, I actually am starting another master's at Boston University in applied business analytics.
Wow.
So I enjoy education. My brother is a professor. My dad is a retired professor. My wife is doing her doctorate in education and is a school teacher. So then I moved to the Rhode Island in 05, and I've been here for 15 years. I started my professional career buying Subway franchises.
Wow.
I don't know if you knew that.
I did know that.
Yeah. So while I was going for my master's at Providence College, I bought Plainville, Massachusetts,
Okay.
Norwood, Massachusetts, and then I built Weymouth, Massachusetts, and I was building Dedham on Route 1.
Wow.
And I think my education came a big part of why I sold. So we're doing valuations and we're looking at like discounted cash flows. And I bought them. These stores are built for relatively inexpensive, especially with tenant improvement money for the new stores, which the landlord gives us money for build out. So my out of pocket really wasn't that much money.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in for not that much. And then when the recession 08, 09 came, and they came out with the $5 footlong, sales really spiked and stayed high. People wanted a good value, low cost lunch.
For sure.
And that drew a lot of foreign investors, or just investors in general, but it seemed to be more foreign than domestic. And they were offering a lot of money per location. And what I was alluding to before is I thought they were overpaying. I'm taking my NOI, net operating income, bottom line, and I'm dividing it by a discount rate. And I'm coming up with like a value of like 200, maybe a little bit, low twos per location. And I'm getting offers at like 400 or 500 per. So I sold them all.
Makes sense.
It did. And I think that was my first, I like to call it big payday.
Yeah.
Or exit.
Yep. And what year was that?
2012.
Okay.
Is when I exited, and it was great timing. Not that I could foresee like the Jared scandal,
Right.
and sales have really plummeted since. I think people are willing, at least pre-COVID, during prosperous times, willing to pay more for lunch, high quality,
Absolutely.
So I think I got out at a great time, and actually I still work with Subway corporate for valuations and expansions, and I think that my exit really impressed them, because everyone was buying and building when I was the one exiting. So I think that really impressed them. So during that time, I started buying multifamilies on the east side of Providence, Rhode Island. I bought 2 before my exit, and then I bought 4 as quickly as I could. And that 2, I think, since 2013, 14, when I bought my 6 or so multifamilies, they've probably gone up 100%, maybe 80% in value. So that was like my second big payday, even though I haven't sold on paper on my balance sheet when you look at my owner's equity.
Right.
But I did sell 1 2 years ago, and sadly to say, I left the east side of Providence, and I bought a nice big single family house, mostly because we have 2 young daughters, and we wanted more space.
Yep.
Or else I'd probably still be in Providence. And then hence that's why it takes me 45 minutes to get down here now.
It happens.
So I bought some more houses, and after I sold the Subway, there was like a time period where I tried different things. I worked in tax for a while on Tremont Street in Boston, at a tax accounting firm. And then I left to go work at, I forget the name. It's in Boston. Is it Beta Spring? It's an incubator for Harvard, MIT startups.
Okay.
I was doing cap tables, valuations, capital raises, mostly private equity for tech startups.
Yeah.
And then I left and started my own boutique business consulting firm, Leshinsky Finance. And I opened my first office in Cranston, Rhode Island.
Yep.
And then and that's probably like 2014, 15. And then soon after, 2 partners came to me that wanted to open up a contract brewing brewery in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which today is the Iowa Brewers Guild. And that was like a $13 million startup.
Wow.
So we had $3.5 million in private equity, $6 million in state government bond financing, and then like $3.5 million in SBA loan debt, and then there was a whole bunch of other incentives. The city gave us a tax treaty. I opened up my second office at the brewery, and then I started getting some bigger clients in Manhattan, and I opened up a third office on 27th and 6th. And then I found myself a little overextended with having a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and my wife being like, "You need to be home more."
Yeah.
So I downsized. I closed Manhattan, and eventually I left the brewery as the CFO, and so I closed that office, and I just work primarily out of my Cranston office today. But I've done a lot of different exciting projects, mostly in New England, upstate New York, in New York City.
And also Warwick too, right?
In Warwick, yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Pontiac Mills, was it?
Yeah, the Pontiac Mills. That was one of my favorite ones. So I think the brewery kind of opened me up to understanding government incentives.
Got it.
So I think that's, if I remember correctly, how I first got involved with government incentives. So I got to learn about new market tax credits, federal historic, state historic, Rebuild Rhode Island.
Right.
And then every state and city has their own incentives that they can offer. I was gonna mention one in West Warwick, I'm forgetting the name of the incentive, but they have some special incentive in a certain district, which isn't uncommon. I feel like municipalities are similar to like businesses where it's competitive. How do you
Right.
draw in,
Exactly.
right? So, like I was doing a good sized development in Everett next to the high school, and they actually don't want additional cars there. So like in some municipalities like Worcester that I'm working on right now, you have to have like one car per every 4 units or something like that. In Everett, it's the opposite. Like they only will allow you to create one parking spot per every 4. Like they'd like you to add no new parking.
Right.
They don't want any new cars. So every city, state has its own incentive, and then it's even hard to. It's constantly evolving, right? With this, the one that came out of the tax reform with Trump, opportunity zone. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So that is a newer one. And they phase in and out with whoever the elected officials are, just like on the state level. With the budget that came out, last summer on the state level, decisions had to be made how much was going to be in the rebuild program. And so here at the Nexus building, if you don't mind, I can reference this a little bit.
Absolutely.
Nick and I were trying to see how much state incentives we could get. And we had this months of waiting for what the budget decisions were going to be and how much would be allocated to the state tax credit rebuild program. So it's not like you get to understand a program and that's what it's going to be like every year going forward. So you could find a building and be like, hey, I can expect this.
Right.
It's an ongoing policy change, and you gotta either keep up with it, like directly, and work with, the state and Mattiello, the speaker, and the governor, or in commerce, or a lot of what I've been doing is even indirectly, where I'm just talking with like a lobbyist group or someone that is involved regularly, and I can just get like the overview of how things are going.
And a quick point I want to make for those watching at home and thinking, what the hell does Mike do? It sounds important. It sounds incredibly difficult. So what I want to do is go to your website quickly, and there's something that I loved on here. Okay, I'm going to read it verbatim. It says, Leshinsky Finance understands the importance of wise strategic and financial planning during all the phases of the business cycle, contemplation to maturation and possible sale of the business. Now, what's most important, you say next. The biggest mistakes happen during time of transition. People neglect to have in place all the right procedures and processes necessary for success. This mistake threatens the efficiency, performance, and the possibility of survival. So what that means to me is, for example, somebody takes a big mill project underway and says, you know what, I'm going to get private hard money at 12%, and I'm going to do the windows. And then I'm going to get more money, and I'm going to do the floors. And then, you know what, maybe I'll pave the parking lot. Oh, hold on, there's an oil tank under the ground. Oh, hold on, I have no income coming in to pay this hard money now. Oh, hold on, will the city even approve my use of this building? as apartments or commercial. So there's so many different dead ends or detours that you can take if you try to take any project more than a multifamily under renovation or under repair, under transformation. So that's where you come in, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's where you will say, hey, before you pave it, why don't we check with DEM, let's test the soil, as we did here. And we had to fill that oil tank. Quite expensive.
Sure.
But if we started doing something first on top of it, maybe we gotta, demolish what we just built. Or maybe we took money out too soon and we didn't need to take it out yet because there was a grant. So what I'm trying to paint to the viewers at home is Mike stays on top of the logical process that you need to follow when you're taking on these type of big jobs. You can't just freeball it. You can't just wing it, because what's going to happen, Mike?
Oh, I would never recommend or suggest that someone just buys a commercial building and then says, oh, I'll slowly develop it with private loans and use maybe some kind of savings that I had. I think, if anything, if you don't inherit a building and you're considering buying a commercial property, and it could be for residential use. When I say commercial, it just, it means it's not a multifamily or single family.
Right.
You get it under an agreement and you get some due diligence time.
Right.
And then you're going to have some environmental studies done and make sure you can even do what you want to do.
Exactly.
And so you try to spend as little as you can up front to see if what your goal is possible. And then if you believe that you can accomplish what you want to, then maybe you acquire the building and be more committed. But you don't want to spend unnecessary amount of money to find out you can't do what you want to for zoning or planning.
Or parking, like you were just talking about.
Or parking. So you got to make sure you're able to do it.
Got it.
And meet all the restrictions.
Well, let me ask you this, not to cut you off, but a
Sure.
question popped in my mind. What if somebody has an idea, like say for example, in Central Falls, there's a beautiful building, I think it's on Hadwin Street. It's buried right in the middle of town. It's a huge mill, it's probably similar to this, 60 to 80,000 square feet. But there's not one parking space. So, if somebody was interested in developing that building, do they have to buy it first to start the feasibility process that you're talking about? Or could they go to the city or go to somebody like you and say, hey Mike, or hey Mayor, I am interested in buying this. What will be my roadblocks? Is that a possibility, or do you have to buy it first before you really know what you're getting into?
Exactly. To what I was trying to explain, if you see a building that you like, let's say the Central Falls one that you just mentioned, and you have a dream of making it an apartment building, you can go to the seller and get it under agreement with a due diligence period of half a year.
Got it.
And then so maybe you put a very minimum amount down just
So
for
just
good
lock
faith.
it under agreement for, how many thousand? 5,000?
5,000 to
10,000?
10,000.
Just to show that you're
And
serious.
it's refundable,
Got it.
right? And then you can spend 6 months to see if what you want to do is a possibility. So in that time period, you're going to engage an architect, maybe, probably your environmental company. I would probably come into play.
So why don't you talk about the Nexus building? Why don't you talk about what Nick did here? He acquired this building up front, didn't do much feasibility. He had an idea, but he really just went all in. Do you suggest that? You're working with Nick now. You saw the course of how he took his steps. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what happened here is a great success story. even more so than maybe the Pontiac Mills, because Larry, the developer owner of the Pontiac Mills, has a track record and a good amount of capital behind him, so it would be a little bit easier, and he has more of the know-how, and that's when I come in. It's either an experienced, seasoned person that has a lot going on and needs support, or it's someone that doesn't necessarily have the experience, and then they want to bring me in for the experience. So those are my two kind of client bases. But I think this is a great success story to see what Nick has done. And I will note, though, so what Nick did is, he bought it with seller financing, puts a minimum amount down, used it for his business, which made sense versus buying it, seller financing, and then try to rent it out. And even if you can get a little bit of cash flow, which might be hard depending on what you're renting it for and existing conditions, is it giving you enough cash flow to make it a good investment? Probably not, right? Because there's a hurdle. I can go buy Providence tax-free muni bonds and get a 5%. So if I'm not getting at least 5% on my money, why don't I just get a no hassle, no risk? I don't have headaches of water,
Right.
leaks and.
There's a lot of those.
This is great for Nick, and I want to know that it could not have turned out so well if we've discovered dinosaur bones in the basement or something. So I wouldn't ever suggest buy a building and then hopefully develop it. If anything, you're gonna get it under an agreement and go through 6 months due diligence, and you're gonna bring in an environmental company. I like Sage Environmental, and they're gonna tell you what kind of environment. Yeah, exactly. Buried oil drums. We found buried asbestos at the Brewers Guild. It's mitigated, but it wasn't free. We had to pay for that. So you want to, before you acquire it, have some of these basic due diligence items completed. But for Nick, it worked out well, right? Yeah. So he bought it, seller financing, used it for Nexus Property Management, and it worked well for him. And then he called me up and he was like, let's do an apartment building. And I was like, yeah, the layout's perfect. Some of them are more complicated. You get more dead space. And you really don't know how many units you're going to get until you engage an architect or someone that can really design the space. So those are your first steps. You're going to meet with an architect and get schematic design or some kind of concept, and then you're going to kind of shop it out to a few different construction companies and get a price tag. It's going to be a conceptual budget. You're not going to get your more exact numbers until you get your construction drawings. Right. But now you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that far along. But you don't need to spend that money up front. You just have to get the schematic design and then get the price tag and make sure there's not going to be any as far as environmental or city restrictions with planning, zoning, and so that's what you do. You get it under agreement. You get 6 months or whatever you can negotiate with the seller for due diligence. You get design from your architect or architect. You get a price tag, and you look at zoning, planning, and environmental issues.
tax credits?
Yeah,
potentially?
yeah, and then, you know, if you can do what you want to do, then you can start looking at your capital stack or source and use. And you're gonna look at like what kind of incentives do I qualify, federal, state, and municipal. And with Nick's building, he qualifies since it's now a registered historic building. And it wasn't when we first met, but we felt confident we could get it registered historic because it's an historic aged building in an historic district.
Yep.
So you just work with the Preservation Society and the Parks and Service, and you can get it registered historic. So we got it registered. So by right, we qualify for the federal historic tax credit, which is roughly 20% of your project costs. There's QREs and just qualifying reimbursement expense and non-qualifying, but for all intents and purposes, we could say 20%. And then the tax credit offsets a tax liability. So like, let's say it's a $10 million development and you get a $2 million federal tax credit. Maybe the individual or entity can't consume a whole $2 million offset of tax liability of $2 million. So you syndicate it or sell it. And then that's your equity for development. So on a 10 million, and the bank says you need 25%, you sell the 2 million tax credits for 1.8 or something, 1.75, and now all of a sudden your cash equity becomes much more manageable. And then you look at what kind of other tax credits you could qualify for. So with Nick's building in the Nexus, we applied for the state tax credit, rebuild, which we were just awarded our allocation a couple of weeks, two weeks ago. And there was a little bit of a delay because of COVID. We were supposed to be awarded in March, but we got it. That's right.
Thankfully.
Yes, thankfully. And then, we approached the city of Pawtucket and we got a 10-year tax treaty. And then what another incentive is we worked with the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank for the first of its kind EPA loan for brownfield cleanup. So they are giving us a 2% loan to do the environmental work that needs to be done. We have asbestos in the roof, windows, floors, and all that needs to go to have housing. So the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank we're expecting a term sheet, I don't know, this month.
Cool.
Yeah. I was just working with them yesterday on the application. They're just waiting for a signature. So those are the incentives, and I think this is one of the best success stories because of the small amount that Nick put down, and not having a bankroll or tons of development experience behind him, and to be able to pull off something like this. I in my book, this is one of the most exciting projects I've worked on.
Awesome.
Even more so than maybe like a $50 million development that's happened many times for this particular developer. That's just one of a number. Yes. To me, it's a win-win for everyone in the local area.
Yeah.
It's good for the residents, it's good for the city, it's good for the developer, it's good for the bank.
So what you just told us is that Nick got lucky. Nick did something that you don't really suggest. He bought a building. He didn't have much gunpowder, He did what he could to make it happen, and Nexus make it happen. But essentially, all the chips aligned properly. He is going to get to the finish line, knock on wood.
Yeah.
But the point is here, folks, what Nick did is not necessarily what every person can do. So somebody like Mike, having Mike in your corner is it's really like it's not even an option to do it by yourself.
It would be hard to do it if you haven't done it before.
So, not pumping his service directly, but anybody that's developing or renovating any type of building, if not Mike, somebody else. It's an absolute essential. We see property owners that can't even manage a ham sandwich, let alone manage a redevelopment where you're working with city governments, state governments, federal governments. I mean, there's so many moving parts, and you're probably busy. You probably have a full-time job. You need somebody. You need Mike. You need somebody like Mike. It's undoubtable. So to segue, Mike, one of my biggest questions, like if I was going to buy any type of, building that needed to be renovated, what should I expect to pay out of pocket? Is there a relative percentage that you could say, all right, you bought this building, it's going to be a $10 million project, expect to have 10% of that liquid, 20% of that liquid, 5%? Like, is there any way you could give an idea? Because people look at a $10 million project and think, I can't afford that.
That's a good question. So,
and I know it's different every time, but if
sure,
you could kind of put a summary or a general,
yeah,
ballpark.
absolutely. So let's use your example of 10 million, and so XYZ identifies a building, and they've already done some due diligence. They met with their architect and their construction company, and they have a ballpark of a 10 million. Now, my next question would be, what tax credits does it qualify for, or what kind of government incentives? Because it doesn't have to be necessarily a tax credit. There's workforce housing loans. Right now, I know of one that's a 0% interest loan. If you develop workforce housing, it's like a 30% of AMI, so you get it's all determined based on the average median income in the neighborhood. But let's say it is an historic building, because they bring more tax credits than a non-historic. So on a $10 million building, I would say it would be good to have maybe $500,000 between cash and cash alike.
Got it.
So, like with Nick, he was lucky that when he bought the building and what it appraises today, fully permitted value, there's a good amount of equity there, enough for him to do the development. So we're using that equity as his cash to do the development, because he doesn't necessarily have to have $600,000-$700,000 in cash. So cash and cash alike.
What is cash alike?
Well, so again, like the equity in this building is because in essence you could like refi at the fully permitted value, and you pay off the note, the existing note, and you would have cash.
Yep.
So some kind of, either it's cash or like readily available cash or something.
Or equity.
Yeah, that's right. A $10 million, development with historic tax credits, both fed, state, and some other incentives. I would say like closer to like 600,000-ish, and there's a lot of wiggle room there and external factors. And to even go one step further, you could always like do a private equity raise. So maybe you're only sitting on like $100,000 or even less.
Yep.
Actually, you don't have to have any money at all if you just have friends and family that believe in your idea.
Yeah.
And
that's
if
true.
you can get enough money and you give like equity, you give them a piece of the building, not physically, but like
Yeah.
on paper. And then maybe you can't even get all the money from friends and family, but if you get some, you could even go to a private equity firm or a non-bank bank can help you get it done and get mezzanine debt.
Non-bank bank.
Yeah,
You heard it here first. And then mezzanine debt.
yeah.
So now we're getting fancy.
Yeah, I mean, so you can really do anything in life if you have a good idea and it makes sense on paper.
Yep.
There's ways to get it done. It might be hard to the point that you give up, but like with the brewery, I mean, the two partners didn't have all the money that was needed. I mean, we had to source all the capital in different ways, and you look at your lowest cost of capital first, and you try to raise as much as that, and then you work your way down.
Right.
But so you really could do any kind of development or even a business if it's a good plan and it's well thought out and people believe in it.
Yeah. But to put an amount, you could say 5 to 10% out of pocket or liquid cash. Is that safe to say?
Okay.
In that example?
Yeah, sure.
So that's pretty reasonable, folks. I think even if it's more than that, even if it's 15%, even if it's 20%, that's normal. I mean, heck, you could buy a 4-family and put 25% down. So it's not unreasonable to think that, you know, you have to put that similar amount down to do a large investment. But I think a lot of folks at home think, I'm doing a $10 million project, I got to pay $5 million or $8 million of that to make it happen. So it's relative to the point of buying a regular old house. You're putting down 20%. It's just a different, you know, set of processes. It's obviously more work, more things involved, but the finances are relative. That's what I'm gathering.
Sure, I would even take it one step further. If you had to put $5-6 million in of cash to do a $10 million, I would probably say that that's not a good investment because you're not going to get the return on investment that you could otherwise get if you invested in another asset class.
Right.
So you got to look at your IRR or internal rate of return to make sure that the development makes sense, or like we like to talk about the risk-free rate, or which is U.S. Treasury. Like it has to be returns should always be relative to risk. So like if the risk-free rate is like a 2%, I need a premium on 2% relative to risk. So if I'm going to do a big development, I got to be making a good amount of return. Yeah, or else I'll just buy muni bonds or treasury bills. Or
That's a good point. So these municipal, state, and federal authorities have to make their offerings, you know, attractive, because if they don't, and all of these mill buildings are sitting vacant forever, that decreases their tax base, it decreases the quality of life in the community,
Yeah, sure.
It decreases all these things. So it's almost like everybody is in it for a deal and wants to get the best deal possible for their interest. So
sure.
as the investor, as the state and local governments do, I mean, there's so many people that are coming to the table, the banks, that's an interesting way to look at it. It's not like big mill building, you're never going to do it. It's like some cities will say, here, we'll give you all this. Please please help us.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So it could be even less out of pocket and more attractive terms. And so it's all relative. And it really depends on the city that you're working in or the town. I'm sure some cities have different feelings, like we're talking about in Worcester. If you're going to develop there, parking is going to be the death of you. But if you're in Pawtucket and you're over near the train station, hell, you could build a garage if you want, because the space is there.
To your point, all parties for the most part, their interests are in alignment. It's a win across the board, from the municipality to the developer to the community, to the tenants in the building.
Right.
So it's a win. So I think most municipalities recognize that, and they offer what they can.
So, like, for example, the Fane Tower that was going to go in Providence, and from what I've read, it's not going to happen because of, coronavirus, things have changed, etc. That was, in my opinion, a total net positive for the city, the state, the region of New England. It was a very positive thing, but there was a lot of resistance in government as well as in community organizations. So how do you grapple when you're doing a project like that, which is such a big ticket? How do you grapple with the resistance from emotion or opinion?
Oh goodness.
Because to more point that people say, oh, it's going to affect our skyline. It's going to change our historical view that we have, or it's going to, be an eyesore, or it's going to make our properties worth less or less significant. So how do you grapple those things, and how do you tread those waters?
As the developer?
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Well, I got mixed feelings of the tower. I wasn't for it, and my tax credit syndicator that I typically like to work with, and consider him a good friend. He gave me a bunch of reasons why he was for it, about the amount of money that it would take to build it, and what it could possibly do for the area. I was concerned about the skyline adjustment. But as the developer, I think you have to show all the positives that you're bringing on the economic level, job creation, and the increased tax base for the city. And you have to show that you're adding value, and how too are you going to handle the adjusting or the adjustments that will be needed, like for roads and infrastructure. Like I think you have to have a good story and be able to explain it to local residents why it's a net positive.
It's interesting. So you have to have like even more pieces of the puzzle than just a traditional development, but now you're talking about, oh well, Mr. Developer, what's your plans for the traffic pattern? What's your plans for the sewer system, the water acquisition, the electricity, like all of these things that you're gonna have to pretty much like recreate downtown.
Yeah, in a big way. I mean, you're going to have to work with the city in planning, and new roads might have to be created,
sure.
and you have to even consider maybe the school system and the number of maybe added students. So everything, I guess, bottom line, the bigger the development, the more thought out it has to be. In a big way.
So what was your opinion on the Paw Sox in Pawtucket?
About them leaving?
Or in general?
Oh, in general?
Like, were you for the new stadium? Or
Oh, yeah. I was very excited about the possibility of them coming downtown. I had a number of conversations with Larry Lucchino, and we talked many times, and we still continue to talk, as I'm actually trying to do a development near the new stadium in Worcester.
Got it.
So we keep in touch. I like him as a person. I am disappointed that the stadium is going elsewhere. I think it would have in a renaissance of a movement for the city of Pawtucket. Right now, it's in a residential neighborhood, and you're not really maximizing the potential of having a sports facility, sports
Right.
team playing ball. When if you had it in an urban setting, you can develop it with restaurants, retail, and the like. Maybe even more hotels, and
Yep.
there's always a money multiplier effect where that more commerce, then there's more spending and
Right.
can spend, and then it goes out and out. So I was disappointed when the decision was made to go to Worcester. I think that would have been transformative for the city of Pawtucket.
And what was the ultimate reason why it didn't move forward?
Oh, goodness. So I became also friendly with the CFO of the Paw Sox, who is no longer with the Paw Sox. I think he's with RSM, the consulting firm in Boston now. And my understanding is they couldn't get clear understanding of the incentives that they were going to be getting from the state. They wanted a certain amount of incentives it goes back to earlier, like municipalities, almost can look at them as businesses. Like, Walmart might be like, hey, come here for Tide, we're selling it for $8, and Target's like, hey, we're selling it for $7. And you have to, as a municipality, kind of behave like that, because other municipalities will try to grab a ball
Right.
team. And if Rhode Island as a state and a municipality can't make it clear what they're going to give, and it's not as competitive or more competitive than another city or state, if it makes sense, like if they have this, all things being equal, like I don't know the population of here versus there in the fan base, but if all things being equal, and the incentives are clear and are greater in Worcester, you're going to leave as a business
Yeah.
decision. Now there are some
Sure.
kind of other factors and variables that go into place, but in a pure business decision, you move. I would have liked him to stay in Pawtucket. I think Larry Lucchino wanted to keep them in Pawtucket.
Yeah.
But that's business. And again, I say there's other variables like you can consider, like the history of the ball team being in Rhode Island and the goodwill and all that, but purely on like an income statement review,
Right.
you're going to make the move. So I feel like that's why the ball team moved. It was the lack of understanding of what they were getting from the state and then their incentives,
Got it.
as far as I understand.
Yeah. So it's just numbers.
Yeah, that's right.
So did the Paw Sox have you as their consultant?
We were talking about that as a possibility, and maybe that's where we would have gone if they didn't end up leaving to go to Worcester. We were going back and forth pretty regularly, and then the decision with them was to leave. So then now I just keep in touch, but
Got
it's not so much about Pawtucket
Yeah.
or
So you built a relationship, though.
Yeah, I have really friendly emails that go back and forth, and he invited me and some other people to a dinner with Pedro Martinez
Cool.
a couple of years ago. Yeah, that was a fun evening. It was nice to listen to him talk on a personal level.
Yeah.
It's really interesting when you meet professional athletes in person. Like, they seem more human to me in person. I mean, he wasn't like this really like big it could have been someone that you would run into at Stop and Shop. I enjoy those moments.
We're all human.
Yeah, that's right.
And
Yeah.
I used to intern at the state police here in Rhode Island, and I remember I was at the Lincoln Woods Barracks, which is right across from the Twin River Casino.
Okay.
They have a barracks there, and I was in, I think I was a sophomore in college. I was like 19 or 20, and the gentleman, I think he was a colonel. His name was Colonel Peck, and I remember being like in awe or just struck by their prestige. To me, Rhode Island State Police are the most prestigious police officers, state police officers on earth. These guys and gals are squared away. So me, I was aspiring to be one, was like, I can't believe I'm interning with these people, these 230 people that represent over 1 million of us. It's a pretty good, to get on that roster.
Sure.
So I was such in awe that Colonel Peck said to me, he goes, "Hey kid, we all put our pants on the same way in the morning." And that just humanized them. And all of them, to me. He
Sure.
said like, "Hey, we're big and bad, we did this, we did that, but at the end of the day, we go home to our families and we put on our pants in the morning just like you."
Yeah, sure.
And that's similar to what you're saying. It sounds like
that's right.
you see a guy like Pedro Martinez on TV, you see him throw Don Zimmer down by the head, remember that brawl?
Yeah,
where he
yeah,
threw
yeah.
him
I
down?
do remember.
It's like you look at people like they're more than human, but they're not.
Yeah, you would have no idea. Besides the fact I recognize the face, being with him that night, literally, you could have ran into him at Home Depot. I mean, you
Right.
wouldn't know.
Right.
There's just we're all just people.
That's it.
Yeah.
What other notable people are you chummy with or have experiences with? I'm sure you've crossed paths with, a lot of people that are, influential.
Well, I when I was doing a lot of work in Manhattan and then also in San Francisco, I got friendly with the guys, the original people from PayPal. In Manhattan, I was CFO of a private bank, an alternative lender, like a Cabbage. I was CFO of a Quarter Spot, and I got to meet a lot of important people at that you would maybe read about in the Wall Street Journal,
Right.
at hedge funds and private equity. I have a client that does luxury. Well, he's a potential client. Luxury fashion in LA. He played professional ball, and his clients are like Justin Bieber and whatnot. So, not that I know Justin.
But yeah, you're getting into that space though.
Yeah, and I don't know. And I've worked a lot with Rhode Island and Massachusetts politicians. So I don't know if they're celebrities or not, but I would. When I was younger, I would see them on TV, and I'm meeting with them more regularly. So
That's cool.
yeah, it's fun.
Keeps your days and weeks different.
Yeah, sure.
Not the same old faces.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I mean, in this video, we've talked a lot about real estate, but I would say half my business is helping businesses raise private equity or just capital, mergers, acquisitions, expansions, and you really see, since I'm industry agnostic, you really see you meet a lot of interesting people. Oh, like The Rock, we
Okay.
yeah. So you just get to meet a lot of interesting people over time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, we're going to wrap it up shortly, but the last thing I want you to say for everybody at home is, what do you think is the most important important thing you've ever learned in your business career that maybe they can take with them and learn from your advice? So what would you say is the biggest lesson, biggest business life experience that you were like, wow, I can't believe that just happened, good or bad, and I'm going to keep that in my tool bag forever?
I mentioned earlier I used to own Subway franchises, and I met a lot of small business owners, franchisees that really lacked like financial literacy and business planning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I kind of started this practice, was to help small business owners and morphed into also real estate developments. But I think the most important thing is kind of having a written down business plan, and it doesn't have to be intimidating like something that you would submit to a professor. It could be just a few pages for internal use, so you know your procedures and processes and proper bookkeeping and financial reviewing of your performance. I think that's critical. I've seen a lot of mistakes made where you know, I remember once there was a Subway franchisee that thought he was having a great month because he didn't realize the landlord hadn't cashed the rent check yet. And you know, but if you're doing proper bookkeeping, you would know it's just not cash, but there's an expense, and you could actually overextend yourself and then bounce checks. And so, you know, having like a plan and making sure it's a good investment and doing proper bookkeeping and reviewing performance and making adjustments. I don't know how you do, I don't know how you go into business otherwise, but it'd be real estate or just a traditional operating business.
A restaurant, a cafe.
Yeah, that's right. I have no idea how you fly by the seat. I think that's dangerous, and you'll never be able to. I had a professor once, the optimal solution within a feasible region. You'll never able to live at like your full potential.
Interesting. Optimal solution at a feasible...
Within a feasible region.
Within a feasible region?
Yeah, because you could have a solution that's maybe not possible, but you want a solution that's possible within the realm of possibilities, right? So, and you don't want to underperform. So if you look at like, you know, the chart and then you're like down here, but
where do they intersect?
Yeah. So, you know, the more you can calculate that, the better. You know, I used to, when I would talk to clients, reference the movie Moneyball. Statistical analysis, right? And how what they could accomplish by you know, using numbers and statistics. So
just combining them and getting the best outcomes.
Yeah, that's right. So, you know, I try to do that for myself and for others, and not that you have to get into that level of detail, but either maybe have someone like myself that gets involved, or just have simple bookkeeping and just have like a budget and kind of compare how you're performing relative to what you wanted to do and see what maybe adjustments need to be made. I don't know how you operate otherwise. I don't know how you, like, it's as much as you can avoid theft and other like activities if you don't know what's happening.
Good point. So, Mike, if people want to get in touch with you, if they have a question, if they need some advice, if they want to hire you, how do you suggest people reach out to you? What's your preferred? Do you want them to go to a website? Do you want them to call a number? What do you want there?
Yeah, I would suggest you go to my website. It's leshinskyfinance.com, LESHINSKY finance.com. And I'll have all my contact, phone, and email.
Also, if anybody wants a testimonial, how has it been like to work with Mike? You know, myself, Nick, here at Nexus, we're happy to give our experience, which we gave much of now. even numbers included. So very transparent. Mike is very easy to reach. He's local. He's boutique, which you said in the beginning. This is not some huge conglomerate, and he's not the face of a business, and you're never going to see him again. Mike is who works for you. He's going to help you, and you can reach him directly, and you can meet him directly. So there's no more value than that. Am I right?
Yeah, thank you.
So once again, thank you all for tuning in. Mike Leshinsky from Leshinsky Finance, and this is Greg here. We're at Nexus's headquarters, your property managed.